What happens when the Raiders are betrayed by the very league they serve? What happens when loyalty, hard work, and sacrifice are thrown aside, not by rivals on the field, but by the very system that should protect them? The history of the Raiders is filled with rebellion, passion, and unforgettable moments. But hidden behind the glory are stories of heartbreak. Stories where players, coaches, and even the entire franchise were left abandoned, deceived, or quietly pushed aside. In this video, we'll uncover 10 Raiders who were betrayed by the NFL, by management, or by fate itself. These aren't just the big headlines you already know. We'll explore the overlooked details, the last-minute decisions that changed careers, the legal battles that still echo today, the betrayals that came from not enemies on the field, but from within the league's own walls. You'll see how some stars were traded when they were still at their peak, how coaches had their reputations destroyed overnight, and how mental health struggles were ignored until it was too late, and how time after time the Raiders carried the weight of the league's darkest controversies. Each story we reveal is more than just football. It's about trust broken, promises shattered, and careers rewritten by betrayal. Stay with us until the end, because the final story may just change the way you see the NFL and the Raiders' place inside it forever. Welcome to History of Raiders. If you love untold stories, hidden truths, and the darker side of football history, you're in the right place. Hit that subscribe button and join us, because today we're exposing betrayals that the league would rather you forget. Number 10. Meta-betrayal. When we talk about betrayal, it's easy to focus on individual players. A release here, a trade there, a coach pushed out under suspicious circumstances, but there's a deeper betrayal, one that reaches far beyond the Raiders' locker room. It's the betrayal of the game itself. The NFL built its empire on the promise of competition, fairness, and respect for the sport. But in recent years, that promise has started to crack. Decisions aren't just about football anymore. They're about spectacle, ratings, and marketability. And time again, the Raiders have been at the center of this shift. Take the way storylines are crafted. Rules bend for certain stars. Controversies are spotlighted, not for truth, but for clicks. The league that once prided itself on being bigger than any player now seems to lean into personalities, turning the field into a stage show. For Raider Nation, this isn't just frustrating, it's personal, because the Raiders, a franchise built on toughness and rebellion, have often been used as the league's scapegoat. Officials, media partners, even league executives, too often the calls favor spectacle over integrity. Penalties that tilt the balance, suspensions handed down to prove a point, narratives written before the game is even played. Every time this happens, it chips away at what football is supposed to be. The Raiders have lived through more than their share of these moments, from controversial calls in the playoffs, to off-field scandals pushed into the spotlight, to ownership disputes framed as entertainment. Each time, the game itself drifts a little further from its roots, and for the Raiders, that shift has meant carrying a burden no team should have to bear. 9. The Brady exception. When Tom Brady retired, many believed his days of influencing the NFL were over. But for the Raiders, his name surfaced in a way no one expected. Brady purchased a minority stake in the Las Vegas Raiders, while, at the same time, stepping into his new job as Fox Sports lead analyst. On paper, this seemed harmless, a legend investing in a franchise while also calling games for millions of viewers. But in reality, it blurred the lines between competition, business, and broadcasting in a way the NFL had always claimed to prevent. For decades, the league enforced strict rules on conflicts of interest.
Analysts and broadcasters were expected to remain objective, with no private stake in the teams they covered. Owners were expected to keep a distance from the media to protect the image of fairness. But in Brady's case, the NFL bent those very rules. He was allowed to attend team meetings, film sessions, and sit in on pre-game conversations that should have been off-limits. This gave him rare access, not just as an investor, but as a voice shaping the national broadcast. For Raiders fans, it felt like a moment of pride. Their team was connected to one of the greatest quarterbacks in history. But for critics, it raised deeper questions. Was Brady granted privileges no one else could have? Did the NFL make an exception just because of his status, ignoring the integrity it demanded from everyone else? This so-called Brady exception wasn't just about the Raiders. It was about the NFL itself, and how easily the rules could bend when the biggest names and the brightest lights were involved.
Number 8. Ownership and management betrayal. Mark Davis. When Al Davis passed away in 2011, the Raiders' torch was handed to his son, Mark Davis. Many believed the legacy of toughness and pride would continue, but instead, the Raiders entered a new era, filled with chaos, poor decisions, and endless frustration.
Under Mark Davis, the Raiders became a team known less for victories and more for dysfunction. Coaches came and went. General managers were hired then fired with little sense of direction. The team shifted cities, leaving behind loyal Oakland fans who felt abandoned after decades of support. Each move carried the weight of betrayal, not just to the players, but to the Raider Nation itself. Even star players who once dreamed of wearing silver and black grew tired of the instability. Wide receiver Davante Adams, one of the NFL's biggest names, openly questioned his future with the franchise. Reports surfaced that he even considered asking for a trade, frustrated with the lack of clear leadership and a winning plan. For a player of his caliber to lose faith said everything about the state of the Raiders under Mark Davis's watch. Critics point to Mark's inexperience and constant meddling as root causes. While other franchises invested in long-term visions, the Raiders stumbled through quick fixes and half measures. Draft picks were wasted. Promising seasons collapsed. Coaches couldn't trust their jobs would last. Players couldn't trust that the organization was building towards success. For a team once feared across the NFL, this level of instability felt like betrayal from the very top. The Raiders weren't just battling opponents on Sundays, they were battling the failures of their own leadership. 7. Ken Stabler's trade. Ken Stabler was more than just a quarterback for the Raiders. He was the face of the franchise. Known as the Snake, Stabler brought swagger, toughness, and a calm confidence that defined the team in the 1970s. Under his leadership, the Raiders finally captured their first Super Bowl victory in 1977. For fans, Stabler wasn't just a player. He was a symbol of everything the Raiders stood for. By the end of the decade, Stabler had become the team's all-time leader in passing yards, touchdowns, and wins. He had carried the silver and black through unforgettable battles and had turned the Raiders into perennial contenders. Yet despite all of this, the Raiders made a shocking move in 1980. They traded their legendary quarterback to the Houston Oilers. The decision stunned fans and players alike. How could the Raiders part ways with the man who had defined their identity for nearly a decade? Reports at the time suggested that owner Al Davis was frustrated with Stabler's off-field lifestyle and his perceived decline in performance. But to many, it felt like betrayal. The Snake still had fire left in him, and the Raiders were letting him go. In Houston, Stabler proved he wasn't finished. He led the Oilers to the playoffs in his very first season, showing flashes of the same brilliance that had made him a star in Oakland. For Raider supporters, watching their hero wear another uniform and succeed in it was painful. The trade marked the end of an era. Stabler's departure was more than just a roster move. It was a moment that reminded fans that loyalty in football can be fragile, even for the greatest legends. 6. Barrett Robinson's Super Bowl absence. In January of 2003, the Raiders were preparing for the biggest stage of all, Super Bowl 37. The spotlight was bright, the stakes higher than ever, and the team needed every man ready. But one of their most important players, center Barrett Robbins, suddenly vanished. Robbins wasn't just any player. He was the anchor of the offensive line, the man who protected the quarterback and directed the blocking schemes. But the night before the game, he disappeared. No explanations, no warning, just gone. When Robbins finally resurfaced, the truth was heartbreaking. He had been struggling silently with his mental health. In the days leading up to the Super Bowl, he had slipped into a manic episode, a state brought on by his yet undiagnosed bipolar disorder. Instead of being with his teammates, he found himself lost in confusion and unable to return in time. The Raiders were stunned. Instead of receiving compassion, Robbins was suspended by the team. On game day, the Raiders were forced to face the Tampa Bay Buccaneers without their starting center. The offense collapsed, the Buccaneers dominated, and Oakland's shot at a championship slipped away. It wasn't until later that Robbins was properly diagnosed. He had been battling bipolar disorder without treatment, and the stress of the season had pushed him past his limits. Yet instead of support, his career unraveled further. In the years that followed, Robbins faced multiple run-ins with the law and a steroid scandal that led the Raiders to release him. What should have been the highlight of his career became the turning point of his downfall. A tragedy shaped not only by illness, but by the way the league and the team chose to handle it. 5. Rolando McClain waived. Rolando McClain came into the NFL with sky-high expectations. Drafted by the Raiders in 2010, he was supposed to be the next great linebacker. Strong, fast, and smart, he looked like the kind of player who could anchor the defense for years to come. At first, things seemed promising. McClain made plays that reminded fans why the team picked him so early in the draft. He could hit hard. He could close space quickly. He could lead. But behind the scenes, trouble was brewing.
Clashes with teammates and coaches started to define his time in Oakland. His confidence looked more like defiance. His intensity often boiled over. The Raiders, already a team known for chaos, now had a young star who felt out of sync with the locker room. By 2012, patience was running thin. Reports surfaced that McClain was unhappy and distant. He even admitted at one point that he was, in his own words, mentally done. That statement shocked fans. It showed a player already worn down at just 23 years old. Off the field, things got worse. Arrests and legal troubles followed him. Headlines were no longer about tackles and sacks, but about fights, disputes, and controversies. Each incident pushed him farther away from the Raiders and farther away from the promise he once held. Finally, in 2013, the team made its decision. McClain was released. For a player drafted to be a franchise cornerstone, it was a stunning fall, from first-round pick to unwanted in just 3 years. The Raiders had taken a gamble, hoping McClain would grow into a leader. Instead, they watched his career unravel before their eyes. 4. Richard Seymour's trade fallout. In 2009, the Raiders made a bold move. They sent a first-round draft pick to the New England Patriots in exchange for defensive star Richard Seymour. On paper, it looked like a statement. The Raiders were trying to rebuild their defense with one of the most feared linemen in the league. But what followed turned into one of the strangest trade stories in franchise history. Seymour didn't want to come to Oakland. At the time, he was a 5-time Pro Bowler in New England, part of Bill Belichick's dynasty. Suddenly, instead of chasing Super Bowls with Tom Brady, he was asked to play for a team stuck in a deep slump. Seymour refused to report. Weeks passed, and the Raiders had to place him on the left squad list, a move that froze his career. For a player at the height of his reputation, it was a stunning standoff. Eventually, under threat of suspension and fines, Seymour did arrive in Oakland. He played hard, even earning 2 more Pro Bowl selections with the Raiders, but the trade fallout never truly ended. His contract was filled with performance incentives tied directly to playing time and team results.
When the Raiders struggled, many of those incentives were left unpaid. By the time his deal ended, much of the money he believed he had earned was gone. For fans, Seymour became a symbol of how unstable things had become. A legendary player traded against his will, pushed into a franchise in turmoil, and then caught in a contract that paid less than promised. The Raiders had hoped to buy respectability. Instead, the move showed how even star players could find themselves trapped in a deal that felt more like a punishment than an opportunity. 3. Bill Callahan and the sabotaged Super Bowl. The year was 2003. The Raiders had fought their way to Super Bowl 37, set to face the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It should have been a defining moment, a chance for glory. But instead, whispers of betrayal soon followed. Wide receiver Tim Brown shocked fans years later with a stunning claim. He said that the Raiders head coach Bill Callahan had sabotaged the team's chances. According to Brown, Callahan suddenly changed the entire game plan less than 48 hours before kickoff. The Raiders had prepared to pound the ball on the ground, using their run game to control the pace. But then, at the last minute, Callahan flipped the script, ordering a pass-heavy attack. Why would a coach do that? Brown suggested it wasn't just strategy. He hinted that Callahan, a close friend of Buccaneers coach John Gruden, didn't want the Raiders to win. The accusation sent shockwaves through the NFL community. Legendary wideout Jerry Rice backed Brown's story. He recalled how the locker room fell into chaos when the change was announced. Players who had drilled one system for weeks were now expected to run another. Many believed the Raiders were doomed before the game even started. The result? A nightmare on the field. The Buccaneers' defense, coached by Gruden, seemed to know every play. The Raiders were intercepted 5 times. Tampa Bay walked away with a blowout victory, 48-21. But not everyone agreed with the sabotage theory. Some teammates dismissed the accusations as frustration over the loss. Callahan himself fiercely denied it, calling it a ludicrous. Still, the story refuses to die. For many Raider fans, the idea that their own coach might have betrayed them remains one of the darkest mysteries in team history.
2. Christian Wilkins' controversial release. In 2024, the Raiders made one of their boldest offseason moves. They signed star defensive tackle Christian Wilkins to a massive contract. It was worth more than $100 million. Most of it was guaranteed. Fans saw it as a new era for the Raiders' defense. Wilkins was supposed to be the cornerstone, the big man in the middle who could change games. But just months later, everything collapsed. Reports surfaced that Wilkins refused to undergo surgery the team recommended. Then came another shocking twist, an alleged locker room incident. A teammate claimed that Wilkins crossed a line with unwanted contact. The story spread fast, and suddenly the star signing was under fire. The Raiders acted quickly, too quickly, some would say. They announced his release, even though he had barely played a snap in silver and black. And here's where the betrayal cuts deep. The team voided the guarantees in his deal. The contract that was supposed to secure his future was ripped apart overnight. Wilkins didn't stay silent. He immediately challenged the decision, filing a grievance through the NFL Players Association. He argued that the Raiders had no right to erase his guarantees, that they had used the controversy as a way out of the contract. The battle moved off the field and into legal territory, raising big questions about loyalty, money, and trust between players and teams. For fans, it felt like whiplash. One moment, Wilkins was the face of the defense. The next, he was a headline about scandal and broken promises. And for Wilkins himself, it was a reminder that in the NFL, even the richest deal can vanish in an instant. 1. John Gruden's email leak lawsuit. In October 2021, the Raiders were shocked by a scandal that spread faster than any headline on the field. Their head coach, John Gruden, was forced to resign after a series of old emails surfaced. These messages, sent years earlier while he worked as a broadcaster, contained racist, sexist, and homophobic language.
The NFL claimed the discovery left no room for him to remain in charge of a team. Within days, Gruden, one of the league's most recognizable coaches, was gone. But Gruden did not accept his downfall quietly. He claimed he had been targeted. According to him, the emails were taken from the NFL's investigation into the Washington football team, and only his messages were chosen to leak. Thousands of other documents remained hidden, while the ones with his name on them ended up in the press. To Gruden, this wasn't coincidence. He believed a league had singled him out, sacrificing his career and reputation in the process. Gruden filed a lawsuit accusing the NFL and Commissioner Goodell of deliberately orchestrating the leaks to destroy him. The NFL fought back, trying to push the case into private arbitration, far away from the public eye. But in 2025, a Nevada court gave Gruden a crucial victory. Judges ruled that his claims could be heard in civil court, where evidence and testimony would be made public. This decision opened the door for one of the most dramatic legal battles the NFL has faced in years. For Raiders fans, it raised old questions about loyalty, power, and whether their coach had been betrayed, not by his team, but by the league itself. The stories we've explored are more than just moments in football history. They are reminders of how easily trust can be broken, even in a sport built on loyalty, sacrifice, and brotherhood. For the Raiders, betrayal has taken many forms: trades that tore apart families, lawsuits that dragged names through the mud, mental health struggles ignored until disaster struck, and league-wide decisions that placed profit and spectacle above fairness and truth. When you step back, a clear pattern emerges. The Raiders have often stood at the crossroads of the NFL's most controversial chapters. They've been rebels, they've been scapegoats, and time and again, they've been survivors. That identity, born in Oakland, carried through Los Angeles, and now in Las Vegas, reflects both the pride and the pain of Raider Nation. Think about John Gruden, whose career was ended in a storm of leaked emails that raised more questions than answers. Or Christian Wilkins, cut loose in a way that left his guaranteed future in ruins. Think about Ken Stabler, traded away despite being the face of the franchise. Or Barrett Robbins, whose battle with mental health was treated as a scandal instead of a cry for help. Each story carries its own weight. Each story reminds us that behind every helmet, behind every headline, there is a person. The NFL often presents itself as a league of values, discipline, fairness, integrity. But what happens when those values are compromised? What happens when control becomes more important than loyalty? When image matters more than justice? For the Raiders, the answer has been clear. They've paid the price. And yet, despite everything, they endure. They fight on. They keep the spirit of rebellion alive. And that's the real question I want to leave with you. How should the NFL treat loyalty? Should players, coaches, and fans expect protection from the league they devote their lives to? Or is betrayal simply part of the business? What must change to make sure the next generation doesn't face the same fate? These aren't just football stories. They're human stories about betrayal, resilience, and survival. And if there's one thing the Raiders have proven, it's that no betrayal, no setback, no injustice will erase their legacy. So now, I want to hear from you. Out of the 10 stories we've uncovered, which one shocked you the most? Which betrayal made you the most outraged? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading each one. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the untold history of the Raiders, make sure to hit that like button. Subscribe to History of Raiders for more hidden truths, forgotten legends, and the stories the NFL would rather leave buried. This is more than football. This is about truth. And Raider Nation will always demand it.